Hi, so today I'm going to be talking about Susanna Clarke's Piranesi. Just a quick PSA, I recorded that video when I was getting sick and I didn't realize it, so I'm very low energy and scatterbrained throughout this video. I tried to edit it down as much as I could, but it took me 2 hours to film and then 6 hours to edit, so I'm not going to be reshooting it. But if you want to go ahead and listen to it on a faster speed, it does kind of help get the point across a bit better. So yeah, enjoy. Now, if you haven't read this book, then you might want to come back to this video after you have, because I am going to be going a bit into depth about it and kind of spoiling it. So if you're not into that, go read the book, come back and watch this video. Unfortunately, I can't really make long form videos without giving a lot away. So if you are interested in more spoiler free videos, I do make those over on TikTok and Instagram under the same username. Otherwise, hey, my name is Frank. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things bookish. Now, if you have read this book and you're watching this video because you want to hear what someone else has to say about it, excellent, because this video is just for you. So first, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the book in case you read it a while ago and you need a refresher, or if you are someone who hasn't read the book and you don't care that it's going to be spoiled. So this is an epistolary novel, which means that it is told entirely from first-person point of view of our main character, Piranesi, through the form of journal entries. So the book starts off with Piranesi navigating this gigantic house, is what it is referred to throughout the book. It's essentially this enormous maze-like labyrinth or just structure known as the world or the house. And our main character is just kind of moving through it, navigating it. It has various hallways and corridors and rooms, and most of these rooms have varying sized marble statues. And these statues range from pretty much anything you can imagine, minotaurs and satyrs to people gardening, children running, parents holding their babies, just a whole bunch of stuff. Just thousands and thousands of statues throughout this entire structure. Now, our main character, Piranesi, does not seem to recall how he came to inhabit this maze. From his point of view, he has just always been there and has always existed there. He also doesn't really care to try and leave. He's not looking for a way to escape. He's not looking to try to get out. He enjoys living there. He has an affinity for being in this house. And from his point of view, this is just how things have always been. For the majority of this book, we know of another character simply referred to as the other. We do not know this character's name because, again, we are being told this story through Piranesi's point of view. So the only information that we have is the information that Piranesi has. And as far as he's concerned, the other character is simply known as the other. Now, because of this, because we are limited to Piranesi's understanding of things, we are led to assume that he is an unreliable narrator. Personally, my understanding, my definition of an unreliable narrator is condensed down to the reader or viewer being exposed to a flawed or altered version of events because our narrator, usually the main character or told from first person point of view, is unable to tell the story objectively. Now, this can happen for a few reasons, but primarily it is because the narrator does not have all of the necessary information to tell us a story objectively, or for one reason or another, they cannot remove themselves from the events and explain them in an objective way. So, for example, on the TV show You, starring Penn Badgley as the character Joe Goldberg, for the first few seasons, we are shown Joe's kind of point of view and the way that he's viewing these events, and it leads the audience to sympathize with Joe as a character. We feel bad for him. We know that what he's doing is wrong, but because of the way that the story is being explained to us, we kind of almost hear him out on his justifications for why he had to do these terrible things and why he has to be that way, until finally, and I believe it's season 3 or 4, we get to this scene.
Mate. I was supposed to be home days ago. The thing about getting money when you never had it is you sort of never really feel like you have it. And for all those people who always did,
Joe, don't ignore me. Joe Goldberg.
Good man in a cruel world. I am going to show you some of my favourite porn.
Have you heard of this writer? Reese Montrose?
I think everyone in Europe has heard of him.
He's made some mistakes. Yeah, he's done some bad things, but he changed. Now everybody wants him to run for mayor. I'm just saying, it kind of inspires me.
Keitra, look at me. I just need to talk to my daughter.
I'm trying to fix.
I need to speak to my daughter.
I'm only trying to
I
fix
need
that.
to speak to my daughter. Help!
I am trying.
Help
There's no one around.
And we realize that Joe has been telling us the story in a way that paints him to be more put together than he actually is. And that he's actually severely dissociating most of the time. From the outside perspective, right, from Marianne's perspective, we see that he is pretty much falling apart at the seams. He's crumbling. But from his perspective, he's keeping things together. He's got it, all together. And that leads the viewer to understand that the way that the story has been explained to us is fundamentally flawed. It's not that we didn't know that what he was doing was wrong from the very beginning. It's just that it was shown to us, the audience, in the way that Joe viewed himself, not in the way that other people objectively viewed him. Now, in a certain sense, this book does a similar thing with our character Piranesi, because although our character is not evil or bad or doing harmful things, we are led to understand that he is suffering from some kind of memory loss and therefore is unable to share his story objectively. We know that something is wrong. We know that there's just something unsettling happening. And as the viewer, we understand that whatever Piranesi is explaining to us is strictly his understanding of things. An example of this is when Piranesi is describing his interactions with the other, who we later find out is known as Valentine Ketterly, Dr. Valentine Ketterly. Piranesi views the other as a friend, as his only friend, because again, he's the only other person that exists in this world aside from Piranesi. But Piranesi is unable to see for himself that the other is not treating him very fairly, not treating him very kindly, kind of blows him off a lot. So from Piranesi's point of view, this is his friend. From the reader's point of view, we understand that that's maybe not the case. Now, most of this book, like the majority of this book, is Piranesi just kind of moving from corridor to corridor, from hallway to hallway, from room to room, and just kind of telling us his daily routine, how he fends for himself, how he goes fishing in the lower levels, how he, gathers mussels and clams, or spends his days with the birds or tracking the tides and things of that nature. We're just kind of getting to know Piranesi as a character, who he is, how he reacts to things. There's not a lot of action. This is a very character-oriented story. And we also come to find out that the other only comes to meet up with Piranesi twice a week for 1 hour and 1 hour only at a time. Ketterly / the other is very adamant about not spending more than 1 hour at a time with Piranesi. And later we find out why. That is because it is not known to Piranesi or the reader for the majority of this book, but that is because Ketterly is going back to the other world, which is our world, our reality, and where Piranesi is in this house is a completely different parallel universe to ours. Now, through these interactions, we discover that Ketterly is not a good friend to Piranesi at all. That is part of why I believe Piranesi to be an unreliable narrator. Eventually, as time passes towards the end of the book, we find out that Valentine Ketterly actually trapped Piranesi, whose real name is Matthew Rose Sorensen, in this world. He wanted to trap Matthew in this world because the longer you stay, the more you lose your memory, the more you forget things. And Valentine Ketterly knew that, but his objective throughout the book is discovering this long lost knowledge that is supposedly in this realm, in this world, in this house with all these marble statues. Right? And so Valentine Ketterly kind of throws Matthew Sorensen into this world and is having him try to find that knowledge for him. Now, the way that Matthew Rose Sorensen ends up in the situation for Ketterly to trap him in the first place is because Matthew was writing a book about a professor who had some kind of scandal and had claimed that he could travel to other worlds. And so Matthew was writing a book about this, not necessarily believing that the professor was telling the truth, but still found him to be a very interesting person and subject to write a book about. So he goes to interview Valentine Ketterly, who was one of said professor's students, and Ketterly sees the opportunity to trap this man in that world. This was 6 years prior. Now, eventually, Piranesi does find his old journals that write all of this out and tell him his own history, and he becomes very upset, obviously, naturally. He's distraught, but he still is able to retain a certain sense of compassion for Ketterly. At first, he really wants to hurt him. He wants to even kill him. He's so upset. But as the couple of days pass where he kind of sits on it, he realizes like he's not actually going to do that to Ketterly. He's not actually going to hurt him. At the end of the book, there is a detective police officer by the name Raphael who does manage to travel to this universe, travel to this parallel world, and rescue Piranesi / Matthew. And that's kind of where the book ends, as Matthew goes back to his life, but has all these versions of himself now. He doesn't just go right back to being Matthew Rose Sorensen. He is still Piranesi. He is still, all of these versions of himself. And he's kind of trying to reconcile with that and find his place and how he fits into the world. That's the overview of the book. We're all caught up. We know what happens. So now I'm just going to kind of get into my feelings about this book. Before I get into my personal thoughts, if you are enjoying this video so far, feel free to give it a like, maybe hit that subscribe button if you're into more bookish content. For the majority of this book, I just kind of had to take it all at face value. And what I mean by that is from the very beginning of the book, we are thrust into Piranesi moving about, talking about corridor number this, hallway number that. According to the way that Piranesi catalogs these hallways and these corridors, they range from like 1,000 in each direction, and that's just as far as he's been able to travel, right? Roughly like 700 this way, 900 that way, southwest, whatever. I concluded for myself very early on that I was not going to get hung up on trying to figure out which hallway was which room number was which. And there are a few, like as you read on, you find out which corridors and which rooms are more important, which statues are more important, because Susanna Clarke makes a point to kind of repeat them over and over again throughout the book, and you realize that those are the ones that you want to pay attention to. For example, the room with the 2 minotaurs, which is where the gateway, I guess we could call, between the two worlds is. So like that one is an important room, right? There are just some rooms that are actually worth making a mental note of, but Susanna Clarke does a pretty good job at letting the reader know which ones they are. I didn't have any issue with that. Like I didn't have any issue keeping up with those things, because like I said, I decided very early on that I wasn't going to try to get too hung up on it. At first I contemplated, I'm like, am I supposed to be like writing these down? Should I be annotating this? And I was like, you know what? No, like if it's important, I feel like it will reveal itself. And that's pretty much exactly what happened, is that as I read through the book, I kind of was able to catch on to what I was supposed to be paying attention to. Throughout this book, Piranesi is a very kind of naive and like almost like a childlike character, in the way that he's very trusting of Ketterly. He's very trusting of the house. He feels like he practices gratitude a lot, is what is something that I kind of notice, is that he's very grateful for the fact that he's able to survive in this house, and that this house provides everything he needs, and that Ketterly is his friend, and in his mind his friend isn't going to hurt him in a way that a child would, right? A child does not see the evil in other people. A child is constantly viewing the world through a lens of innocence, and I feel like Piranesi was very much like that throughout the majority of this book. Ketterly is his only friend, but like there are a couple points where he does have other friends kind of, but they're all deceased, right? These are all piles of bones, people that he has named in his own way, you know, the biscuit box man and whatnot. And so he takes care of them. Periodically, we'll bring them food, we'll bring them water, we'll spend time with them, we'll clean their bones and organize them nicely. And at a certain point, when there's that flood that comes at the end of the book, he makes a point to move the bones somewhere where they will be safe during this flood. He makes a point to take care of his other friends. This was just kind of a testament to the way that Piranesi valued the house and everything that it had to offer, and he was showing his respect for not only for the dead but for the house itself. He also repeatedly refers to himself as the child of the house or the blessed child, and that just kind of like is a testament to his relationship with the house itself. The author does have Piranesi moving about these corridors and hallways for the majority of the book, and it does give the book a very slow moving vibe to it, which I will get to later on in the video. At some point, we learn that everything that exists in this house, all of these marble statues, are essentially knowledge and artifacts from our world that have become obsolete. And with that forgotten knowledge, it has kind of like they appear as statues in this other world. So every time we forget about something, it appears as a statue in this house. Our old gods, our old knowledge that humans have abandoned for the sake of progress. Now, I felt like Clarke highlighted this point because she wanted to kind of showcase that just because something has been abandoned or forgotten does not necessarily mean that it was a positive effect or a positive change. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it was for good reason or that it's going to lead to something better. This is kind of reiterated at the end of the book when Piranesi gets rescued and he goes back to his original world, aka like our world, and he misses the house. He kind of is contemplating, you know, whether or not he wants to stay in his old world or go back to the house and live there, because he reveres the house and he understands that everything that it provided for him was everything that he needed. I got a couple different messages from this, like from Piranesi's relationship to the house. I think it can be viewed, if we're looking at it from a more like macroscopic lens, like a more big picture type thing, then it could be a warning about how humans abandoning ancient knowledge and ancient wisdoms for the sake of progress can lead to the destruction of our planet, the destruction of ourselves, the destruction of cultures, how that might not necessarily always be a good thing. Just a personal insight, I feel like we are seeing that now with the rise of generative AI. We have so many examples of how it's just like not good for us, and it is destroying our planet and our psyches very quickly, and yet for some reason we're still seeing it pushed to us in almost every facet of our lives. All these different apps, websites, it's being pushed onto us, and it reminds me of like this.
You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Now, if we take it into a more personal or like introspective point of view, something that I kind of noticed just personally, and this could just be me projecting, this could be my personal relationship to this story just kind of coming out, but I felt like Matthew slash Piranesi's character, there was an element of having to rediscover oneself after going through something very traumatic or experiencing a disability, which is shown through his memory loss. If you've never been chronically ill, if you've never been disabled, it feels a lot like what Piranesi experienced, in the sense of acknowledging that there are different versions of yourself that reside within this body of yours that you will have to mourn. You will have to realize that you can never be that version of yourself again. You can never be that version of yourself prior to having a disabling event or chronic illness. And you just have to make peace with that version of yourself, knowing that you'll never know it again. You will never be the same. Your life will never be the same. Like everything you experience from that point on will be through the lens of the event or illness that has impacted you. I feel like the house was a metaphor for one's body in the way that like it provides everything you need until it doesn't. It's always changing and shifting, and you can pay attention to the patterns. You sometimes can hurt you, it sometimes can let you down. And yeah, I mean, that again, that might have just been my personal understanding of it. I don't know. That's just kind of how I felt if I was thinking about it on a more like internal view as opposed to like a wider angle view. Another point that I just want to make is that I really appreciated that there was not a heavy romance like subplot in this book. I feel like a lot of the books that I read nowadays just kind of really rely on heavy romance plots or um, just romance in general to carry character interactions or character arcs through. But this book did not have to do that. It managed to tell a very beautiful story with a very important message, in my opinion, without having to rely on romance. There is like a whisper of romance at the end of the book, or one could interpret it that way, between Matthew slash Piranesi and the detective that came to rescue him, who goes by the name Raphael, like it's just her last name. But it's that's simply like something that could be interpreted. It's never really explicitly stated for the reader. And like I said, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that this was kind of, it wasn't trying to make it something that it wasn't, in the sense of like trying or forcing some kind of romantic connection purely for the sake of, I don't know, enticing the reader or something like that. I feel like some books kind of have to do that now, whether it be because of publishing houses kind of like asking for that, or readers kind of demanding that, in the sense that like, oh, I'm not going to read that if there's no romance or something to that effect. Not that there's a lot of readers who do that, just to say I noticed that there was no romance in this, and I enjoyed that because almost every book I have read this year has some romantic, either it is the main plot point or it is some kind of subtext that is used to push the story forward, and this book did not need to do that, and I'm glad that Susanna Clarke did not do that. On that note of the author doing things that I feel like kind of vary from the stories that I typically read, is that Piranesi was able to maintain his naivete and his innocence even after finding out that Ketterly was plotting to murder Raphael, or even told Piranesi to his face, like, man, I might have to kill you if things don't go right. And Piranesi was like, wait, why? You know, like even after finding out that Ketterly would have resorted to violence, even after finding out that Ketterly did trap him in this world for 6 years, he still was able to find enough compassion and understand, like, because Piranesi had the opportunity to kill Ketterly. He had the opportunity to hurt him. He had the opportunity to defend himself, and he still didn't. He still trusted in the house. He trusted that things were going to work out. But at the end, Piranesi chose to even try to save Ketterly instead. Now, I have no issue with main characters getting their lick back, or like smiting their enemies for revenge, or for, self-defense, or anything of that nature. I actually kind of sometimes I do prefer that kind of storyline where like somebody is wronged and they turn around and they're like, you know what? Fuck you, I'm gonna get my lick back. And they do. I like that. But I feel like for this particular story, for Piranesi's character specifically, because of the point that I feel like Susanna Clarke was trying to drive home with this character, it would have been out of pocket. It would have been out of place. It wouldn't have made sense for Piranesi to just like turn around and try to hurt Ketterly, because for most of this book, he's so trusting and he's so like kind and he's so compassionate and innocent, that like for just a switch to flip would have been just out of place. It wouldn't have made sense for Piranesi's character, in my opinion, right? Because, like, to me, it felt like Ketterly was supposed to represent all of the ugliness and the greed of humanity, you know, this like desperate attempt at seeking knowledge or information that has been lost to us, you know, for or just for the sake of progress. While Piranesi's character was the opposite, right? That knowledge that Ketterly was seeking was kind of just like naturally bestowed upon Piranesi because he was trusting in the house. I think that was the forbidden knowledge that Ketterly had been seeking, which is what Piranesi just fundamentally understood the longer he was there, which is that like you trust in nature, you trust in the house, you trust in what it has to provide for you. And if you pay attention and you're kind and compassionate enough, it will bestow all of these gifts on you. And it's about practicing gratitude. Like maybe that was the knowledge that we were supposed to be seeking to begin with. I don't know. Just a thought. Again, it was that Piranesi trusted that, you know, he wasn't seeking it out. He was just I don't even think he realized that the knowledge that Ketterly was looking for was something that had already been gifted to Piranesi. Now, before I say what I'm going to say next, I do want to reiterate, like, I did enjoy this book. I did like reading it. I did enjoy this, and I think I might have to do a reread at some point just because, like, I feel like there might have just been so much subliminal messaging or like little hidden Easter egg type things that I did not kind of pick up on maybe on the first read because I didn't really know what I was getting myself into when I read this book. I feel like I do need to just preface that by saying I did enjoy this. It had a unique premise, it was well written, and I managed to get through it pretty quickly. Well, like at least quickly in, you know, relation to how fast I usually read something, right? Because I'm a pretty slow reader. Unfortunately, I did not enjoy this book as much as I think I might have had I come across it via different means. This novel was recommended on my For You page on my algorithms quite a few times. And because of that, I had hyped it up in my mind so much. Unfortunately, it just did not live up to whatever expectations I had placed on it. This has nothing to do with the story, the plot, the writing, the characters, none of that. It is of no fault of the author. It is simply because sometimes when we are anticipating something and when we're very excited about something and when we hype it up in our minds, the actual experience does not live up to these expectations. And unfortunately, I think that's just what happened for me with this book, is that because of the way that the story is, when someone is recommending it, oh my god, it's so bright. When someone is recommending this book, they can't really give too much away about what happens. You know, they just kind of describe it as like, oh, it's this guy who's in a house and he's exploring this house, and you're like, okay, like, what else? And that's pretty much what the book is, until right at the very end when everything kind of pops off and you realize how he ended up in this house, why he's there, why he doesn't have a memory. It all just kind of happens towards the end of the book, so you can't really give too, when you're recommending it, you can't give too much more away than that, otherwise you just ruin the whole book for somebody. So the way people kind of described reading this, it felt like they were talking about it like it was some surreal, mind-blowing, cerebral experience. And while I did get some of that, I did get that feeling, I did get that vibe, it just wasn't as hard-hitting as I think it would have been had I come across this book through different means. I am so sorry for the lighting. The sun it's been overcast all day, so I figured I could kind of like shoot my video. So whatever, I'm sorry. As I mentioned earlier, like this book was pretty slow moving, and some of the critiques that I saw were that this book was boring. And that is because it is a very slow moving book. There is not a lot of action because this is not a plot driven novel. This is a character driven novel. This is more like it falls under the umbrella of speculative fiction, but this is literary fiction in the sense that this is about one person's journey. You know, this is about mostly about our main character and him discovering himself and having to rediscover himself and having to find out that he went through this horrible thing where 6 years of his life, like a version of himself, was stolen from him, and having to navigate that feeling and having to navigate the idea of not only was that taken from him, his life as Matthew Rose Sorensen, but now he has to kind of like, after living in this house, go back to living in the real world, which is so totally different than everything that this house embodies. And so, if you are expecting a very heavily plot driven novel, you will be disappointed. That is not what this book is at all. Now, luckily for me, I adore literary fiction. I love books that are more about character arcs, that are more about character psychology and their navigation of internal battles or external battles and how they affect their psyche and their internal landscape and whatnot. And for me, those are books that I enjoy more than anything. That's why I really like thrillers and horror novels, especially like gothic horror, because, and that is a genre that I just like recently got into and it's like consumed my life. And it's because gothic horror is in itself, it has supernatural elements to it, but it is primarily about the horrors of the human psyche and what can happen if someone is driven mad or what have you. Anyway, so yeah, this book had a rich internal landscape for character, like for our main character. It had that in spades. That is primarily what this book is. And so I enjoyed that. Even though it wasn't what I was expecting and I was let down a little bit in that way, I still very much enjoyed that element of this book. So, like I said, if you're expecting something where there's a lot of action, a lot of drama, a lot of this, that, and the other, you will not find that in this book. So, keep that in mind if you haven't read it and you're still watching this video. With all of that being said, I do think it was worth the read. If I were to give my genuine thoughts on this book in a nutshell, I would say that it was a beautifully written story. The premise was very unique. I've never really read it. It felt like just one long bottle episode is kind of like what this book was. This character in this set of circumstances and having to remain in this one place for almost the entire book. I feel like there was that messaging, like I mentioned earlier, of the dangers of seeking out knowledge or progress simply for the sake of it and not kind of thinking of the ways that it will truly impact the world, impact ourselves, impact our culture, our environment. And also that other part of the messaging that I mentioned where it could also be viewed as our own relationship to ourselves and all of these different versions of ourselves and having to kind of navigate what it feels like to have to mourn these versions. So to wrap this all up, I will say that if you have watched this video up until now and you have not read the book, go do that. It is still very enjoyable. I'm sorry that I spoiled it for you, but it's still worth the read. And if you have read this book, I would love to know your thoughts. How did you feel after you read this book? Did you think that my thoughts on this were accurate at all? Let me know in the comments. And yeah, until next time, guys.